No nanny could handle the Billionaire'S quadruplets. Until he saw what the new maid did after their mother disappeared, 4 children began driving away anyone who tried to care for them. More than 20 nannies quit, leaving behind a collapsing home and a distant father watching from behind cameras. Then a woman arrived with no degree, no promises, and no fear. The billionaire thought she was just another one, until he saw what she did. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. The mansion in the wealthy suburbs of Westchester County, New York, was far too quiet for a Thursday afternoon. The kind of silence that has weight, that fills the rooms like an invisible, suffocating presence. Richard Miller watched the security monitors installed in his private office, each screen showing a different angle of the house he no longer recognized as a home. Empty living room, deserted hallway, an impeccable cold kitchen, and there, in the kids' room, the mess he no longer knew how to fix. It had been 6 months since Patricia had left. There was no fight, no scandal, just a note on the kitchen table, a few suitcases that vanished in the middle of the night, and an emptiness that spread through the house like an oil slick. Richard remembered the next day as if it were yesterday. Gabriel, the oldest at just 10, had found the note before he did. When Richard came down for breakfast, his 4 children were sitting at the table in absolute silence, looking at him, as if they expected him to have answers. But Richard didn't have answers. He never had. He was good at other things, building business empires, closing multi-million-dollar deals, commanding boardrooms with hundreds of employees. But there, facing 4 pairs of frightened eyes, Richard Miller discovered that all his power was worthless. He didn't know how to explain the unexplainable. He didn't know how to heal a wound he felt gaping in his own chest. The first few days were a blur. He hired the first nanny on a recommendation from a colleague, an experienced woman, impeccable references, an extensive resume. She lasted 5 days. The second came recommended by a specialized agency. She was gone in 3. The third didn't even make it a week. And so it went with the others. 22 attempts in 6 months. 22 nannies who quit, confirming for Gabriel, Lucas, Sophia, and Peter that they were the problem, that they weren't worthy of being kept, that they were disposable. Richard watched it all on the cameras. He saw 8-year-old Lucas explode into screams when he didn't get his way. He saw 6-year-old Sophia hide behind furniture for hours, testing to see if anyone would notice. She was gone. He saw Peter, the youngest at 4, cry desperately over anything, as if every frustration was the end of the world. And he saw Gabriel take on a role that shouldn't have been his, trying to control his siblings with the rigidity of someone carrying a weight far too heavy for his small shoulders. He knew he should be there. He knew he should come down from that office, go into their rooms, sit on the floor, and talk. But how? How could he talk about feelings when he had never learned to name his own? Richard had grown up in a strict orphanage in upstate New York, where emotions were seen as weakness, and vulnerability was punished with indifference. He had built his entire life like a fortress, layer upon layer of control, until nothing could hurt him again. But now that same fortress held him prisoner, unable to reach his own children. It was on a rainy afternoon in June that the 23rd candidate showed up. Richard wasn't even home when the doorbell rang. Mr. Henderson, the family's longest-serving employee, responsible for maintaining the property, answered the door with the suspicion of someone who had seen many come and go. Marina Williams was standing in the light rain with no umbrella, a simple bag slung over her shoulder. She had no printed resume, wasn't from any agency, and brought no letters of recommendation. She had only 42 years of life, a serene gaze, and an inexplicable certainty that she was supposed to be there. Mr. Henderson frowned. How had she gotten the address? Who had sent her? Marina smiled gently and said she'd seen the discreet ad Richard kept on a specialized website, that last desperate resort he no longer even checked. It wasn't the truth, not entirely. Marina had seen the ad, yes, but that wasn't what brought her there. 3 nights earlier, she had woken from a dream so vivid her heart was still pounding. In the dream, there were 4 children in a dark room, each in a different corner, and she walked in holding a candle. It wasn't a mystical vision, not a divine message in the traditional sense. It was just that deep, visceral feeling that something was calling her. And Marina had learned, after years of carrying a nameless pain, to trust those feelings. Mr. Henderson hesitated, but something in the woman's eyes made him step back. He let her in, asked her to wait in the living room, and went to call his boss. Richard was in an important meeting when he got the call. His first reaction was to send her away. He had no hope left. He no longer believed anyone could succeed. But Mr. Henderson insisted in a strange way, almost as if he didn't understand why he was insisting himself. Richard got home late that afternoon. He found Marina still sitting in the living room, with the same serene posture looking out the window. At the yard where the children no longer played, he walked in, tired, and got straight to the point. "Do you have experience with difficult children?" Marina turned to face him. "Difficult or hurting?" The question caught Richard off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't. Marina continued, her voice firm but gentle. "Children aren't difficult, Mr. Miller. They're reacting to pain the only way they know how. And if every adult who has come through here has given up on them, it's not because they're impossible. It's because the adults were looking for control, not connection." Richard felt a wave of irritation rise in his chest. Who was this woman to come into his house and judge him? But at the same time, something in her words touched an old wound, a place he had locked away for decades. "How much time do you want?" he asked, crossing his arms. "As much as it takes," Marina replied. 2 weeks. If things aren't better in 2 weeks, you're gone like all the others." Marina nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't negotiate. She just accepted. That same night, she met the children. Mr. Henderson took her to the second floor where the 4 of them were locked in the room they shared by choice, refusing to sleep separately since their mother had left. He knocked on the door, announced there was a new person in the house, and left quickly, like someone fleeing a ticking bomb. Marina stood in front of the closed door. She didn't force her way in. She didn't yell. She just sat down on the hallway floor, leaning against the wall, and waited. From the other side, she heard whispers, nervous laughter, the sound of objects being dragged. They were planning something. She knew this. Game. It was the test, the emotional trap. After 20 minutes, the door flew open. Lucas appeared first, a defiant smirk on his face, holding a bucket full of water. Marina looked at him, then at the bucket, then back at him. And instead of getting up or backing away, she simply stayed seated, her legs crossed. "Go ahead and throw it if it'll make you feel better," she said calmly. Lucas hesitated. He hadn't expected that. He expected yelling, scolding, maybe even for her to leave immediately. But she didn't move. She just looked at him with those calm eyes, as if saying without words that she understood his anger, that she wasn't afraid of it. Gabriel appeared behind Lucas, pulling him back into the room. "Forget it," he said, his voice too firm for a 10-year-old boy. "She'll leave on her own anyway." The door closed again. Marina stayed there, sitting on the floor. She didn't go to her room. She didn't go down for dinner. She just stayed. At some point in the night, she began to sing softly. It wasn't a well-known song, just an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing when she was little. The gentle melody echoed through the silent hallway. Inside, Peter, the youngest, pressed his ear to the door. Sophia crept closer too, curious. Lucas crossed his arms and turned his face away, but he was still listening. Gabriel pretended not to pay attention, but his rigid posture began to soften. Marina sang for almost an hour. Then, in silence, she got up and went to the room Mr. Henderson had prepared for her. She didn't say goodnight. She didn't try to force anything. She just respected their space. The next morning, when she came down for breakfast, she found the kitchen empty. The children hadn't come down. She made a simple pot of coffee, made toast and scrambled eggs, and left it all on the table. Then she went back upstairs, past the spot in the hallway where she had waited the night before, and sat in the same place. This time she brought a book. She didn't knock on the door. She didn't ask for permission. She just sat there, reading in a low voice. The following days followed the same pattern. Marina didn't try to invade their territory. She respected their boundaries but maintained a constant presence. She tidied the house in silence, cooked, and left food by their bedroom door. She didn't demand they eat. She didn't force interactions. She just existed there, steady and constant. Richard watched everything on the monitors with a mix of skepticism and fascination. This woman was different. She didn't try to apply techniques, didn't follow manuals, didn't show frustration. She simply remained. On the fourth day, Sophia was the first to come out. Marina was in the garden, tending to some neglected plants. The little girl appeared at the window, watching from a distance. Marina waved gently and continued her work. Sophia didn't respond, but she didn't leave the window either. On the fifth day, Peter left the door ajar as Marina walked down the hall. She stopped, looked inside without intruding, and asked if he needed help with anything. He shook his head and closed the door again, but this time without locking it. Lucas was the most resistant. He tested Marina constantly. He spilled juice on purpose, scattered toys around the house, and provoked her with harsh words. But Marina never raised her voice. She cleaned the juice in silence, picked up the toys while humming, and when he insulted her, she would just say with gentle firmness that she understood he was angry. But he didn't need to hurt her to feel seen. Gabriel remained the highest wall. He didn't provoke, didn't test, he just ignored. He treated Marina as if she were invisible, a temporary presence unworthy of attention, because she would soon be gone like all the others. But Marina didn't give up. And unlike the others, she didn't seem offended by the resistance. She seemed to understand that each behavior was just a different language for the same pain, and she was willing to learn, them all. On the 10th day during the dinner Marina had prepared and left on the kitchen table, Peter came downstairs for the first time. He stood in the doorway looking at the food, then at Marina, who was washing dishes. "Can I eat?" he asked in a small voice. "Of course," Marina answered, smiling. "I made it thinking of you." Peter sat down slowly, as if expecting the permission to be revoked at any moment. Marina didn't sit with him. She gave him space. She just stood there, present but not intrusive. And when he finished, he brought his plate to the sink and whispered an almost inaudible thank you before running back upstairs to his room. Marina smiled to herself in the empty kitchen. It was a start. Small, fragile, but real. She knew the road ahead would be long. She knew there would be setbacks, crises, moments when the pain would explode in unexpected ways. But she also knew she was in the right place, not because of her own merit, not because of professional competence, but because something bigger than her, something she couldn't rationally explain, had guided her to this house. Meanwhile, Richard continued to watch from a distance, trapped in his office, unable to come down but unable to look away. And for the first time in 6 months, a strange feeling began to stir in his chest. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was something smaller, more hesitant. It was the remote possibility that maybe, just maybe, this woman could reach his children in a way he never could. And if she could, what would that say about him? Richard pushed the thought away and went back to the monitors, watching Marina walk up the stairs with a glass of warm milk and leave it by the children's door before retreating to her own room. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know that her every gesture was being analyzed, questioned, feared, and secretly hoped for by a man who no longer remembered how to get close to someone without building walls. There were only 4 days left on the deadline he himself had set. 4 days to decide if this strange woman, with no degrees or guarantees, would be allowed to stay. 4 days to find out if change was possible, or if he should finally accept that his family was irrevocably broken. But Marina, lying in her simple room, staring at the ceiling in the dark, wasn't thinking about deadlines. She was thinking about the 4 children upstairs, about their individual pains, their wounded hearts. And she was also thinking of Laura, her daughter, the one who had left so long ago and left a void that nothing had ever completely filled. Was that why she was here? Was she trying to save other children because she couldn't save her own? The question hurt, but Marina didn't run from pain. Not anymore. She had learned that the only way out was through, and that was exactly what she would do. She would walk through this house full of silences, these children full of internal screams, this man locked in his fortress of control. She would walk through it all until she found the other side, or she would die trying. Outside, the rain had started falling again over New York, and inside the silent mansion, each in their own corner, 6 people carried wounds they still didn't know how to heal. But for the first time in a long time, they weren't completely alone in their pain, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin. The second week began with a subtle but significant change. Gabriel came down for breakfast. Not of his own free will, he made clear. He was only coming to make sure his siblings were safe, to supervise them as he always did. But Marina understood what it really meant. It was a different kind of test, no longer one of rejection, but of observation. Gabriel wanted to see her up close, to understand who this woman was, who wouldn't leave. She made pancakes that morning, not the regular kind, but the small, fluffy ones. That stacked up on the plate like a tower. Sophia appeared shortly after Gabriel, drawn by the smell. She stood in the kitchen doorway, hesitant, until Peter came stumbling down and ran to sit at the table. Marina didn't make a fuss. She served the plates in silence, placed syrup and fruit within their reach, and discreetly moved to the window, giving them space to decide. It was Sophia who moved first, sitting next to Peter. Gabriel hesitated for another minute, but eventually pulled up a chair. Only Lucas remained absent, locked in his room, maintaining his wall of anger. Richard watched from his office doorway, partially hidden. He had come down for coffee and stumbled upon the strange and yet devastatingly simple scene. His children sitting at the table, eating together. When was the last time he had seen that? Before Patricia left? Or had it been longer? His memory was a blur of meetings, business trips, and work dinners. How many meals had he missed? How many moments had slipped through his fingers while he built an empire that now felt empty? Marina sensed his presence before she saw him. She turned, and their eyes met for a brief second. Richard flinched, uncomfortable, and retreated back to his sanctuary. But something in her gaze followed him. It wasn't judgment. It was recognition. As if she saw past the facade, straight to the frightened boy he had hidden for decades. The following days brought small breakthroughs. Sophia started following Marina around the house, always at a safe distance, watching everything she did. When Marina folded laundry, Sophia would appear at the bedroom door. When she watered the plants, Sophia would sit on the steps leading to the garden. She didn't speak, but her presence was a silent form of approach. Peter grew bolder. He started asking questions, childish, direct questions without a filter. Are you going to leave too? Why did Mommy leave? Are we bad? Marina answered with age-appropriate honesty, without lies that would sound false, but also without truths he wasn't ready to carry. Gabriel maintained his constant vigilance. He watched Marina's every interaction with his siblings, every gesture, every word. He carried the weight of being the protector, and Marina understood she couldn't win him over until he trusted that she wasn't a threat. So she didn't try. She just made sure he saw her, being consistent day after day. Lucas was the most complex challenge. His anger hadn't subsided. It had intensified, as if he were testing just how far he could go before Marina gave up like all the others. He broke a vase on purpose. Marina cleaned up the shards without a word of reprimand. He tore a book she was reading. Marina simply picked up another one. He screamed horrible insults for an 8-year-old. Marina took a deep breath and calmly said she knew he didn't really mean it, that behind the anger was just pain and that she wasn't going anywhere. It was around this time that the external problems began. Mr. Henderson had never trusted Marina. From day one, he saw her as an opportunist, someone taking advantage of the family's vulnerability. How had she gotten into this house without references? Why had his boss allowed her to stay when so many others, with impeccable credentials, had been dismissed? Something was wrong here, he was sure of it. Driven by a distorted sense of loyalty, Mr. Henderson started making calls, first to acquaintances who worked in other family homes, trying to dig up dirt on Marina Williams. Then, when he found nothing incriminating, he made an anonymous call to the Child Protective Services hotline, claiming that children were under the care of an unqualified person, possibly at risk. Marina knew nothing of this. Her days continued at their own pace, each small victory celebrated internally. Sophia finally spoke to her for the first time, asking if she could help make cookies. Peter started calling her by name instead of avoiding any form of address. Gabriel allowed her to check his homework, a small but significant breach in his armor, and then on a rainy Tuesday, the doorbell rang. Marina answered it to find a middle-aged woman with a serious expression, holding a folder and an ID, a social worker. "Routine visit," she said, but her eyes said something else. It was an inspection. Marina's heart pounded, but she remained calm. She invited the woman in, offered her coffee, and tried to act natural while feeling the weight of the investigative gaze scanning every corner of the house. The children, who were in the living room, sensed the tension immediately. Gabriel pulled his siblings close. Lucas stopped playing. Sophia hid behind the sofa. Peter started to whimper. The social worker asked questions, lots of questions, about Marina's qualifications, about the father's presence, about the children's routine, about school, about their diet, about their health. Marina answered everything transparently, but each question felt like a veiled accusation. "Where is the children's legal guardian?" the social worker asked in a formal tone. Marina explained that Richard was in an important meeting but could be reached. The woman jotted something in her folder and asked to see the children's rooms. As they walked up the stairs, Marina felt 4 pairs of eyes following their every move. The children were terrified, not of the visit itself, but of what it could mean. Separation, foster care, being taken away from each other. Gabriel was the first to act. He ran to Richard's office on the 2nd floor and banged on the door. When Richard opened it, annoyed by the interruption, Gabriel simply said in a trembling voice that there was a woman in the house who wanted to take them away. Something changed in Richard's face. For the first time in months, he left his office without hesitation. He hurried down the stairs and found the social worker in the 2nd floor hallway, Marina standing beside her with a worried expression. "Can I help you with something?" Richard asked with the authoritative tone he used in negotiations. The social worker introduced herself and explained that she had received an anonymous tip about possible neglect and inadequate care of the children. She needed to verify the conditions of the home and interview the minors. Richard felt anger rising. Who had the right to question how he cared for his own children? But then he looked around and saw his 4 kids huddled on the stairs, Gabriel holding a silently crying Sophia, Lucas with his fists clenched, Peter clinging to Gabriel's leg. And he saw Marina standing there, serene but clearly shaken, waiting for him to do something. For the first time in 6 months, Richard Miller had to face the truth. It wasn't Marina's credentials that mattered. It was his children, and they needed him there, present, defending the only home they knew and the only person who had managed to reach them when he himself had failed. Richard invited the social worker into his office. He presented documents, explained the situation, and made calls to his lawyers. He spent hours answering questions, providing proof, defending Marina, and proving that the house was suitable, that the children were being cared for, and that yes, he was present even if not in the traditional way. The social worker, after a thorough evaluation, seemed satisfied. She would file a positive report, but warned that she would monitor the case for the next few months. Any sign of trouble and she would be back. Richard agreed, tense but relieved. When the woman finally left, the entire house seemed to exhale at once. The children ran to Marina, even Gabriel, asking if she would have to leave if they were going to be separated. Marina knelt on the floor and hugged them all at once, saying firmly that she wasn't going anywhere, that nothing and no one would take her away. Richard watched the scene from a distance. Something broke inside him, a crack in the fortress he had built. For the first time he saw what he was missing. Not just his children's childhood, but the chance to be someone real for them. Someone who not only provides, but protects. Not only pays bills, but offers his presence. That night, after the children were asleep, Richard went down to the kitchen where Marina was making tea. She looked up, surprised. It was the first time he had sought out a voluntary interaction. "Who made the call?" Richard asked. Marina shook her head. "I don't know. But it doesn't matter." "Yes, it does," Richard insisted, his anger simmering. Marina poured 2 cups of tea and pushed one toward him. "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, what matters is that for the first time, Your children saw you defend something. Not a business, not a contract. Your family. They saw you stand between them and a threat. That's worth more than finding out who made the call. Richard was silent, holding the warm cup in his hands. You think I'm a terrible father. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I think you're a frightened man, Marina answered gently. Frightened of repeating something that hurt you in the past. Frightened of being vulnerable. Frightened of failing. How do you know that? Richard asked, but his voice held no anger, only weariness. Because I'm scared too, Marina confessed. Scared of getting attached and losing again, scared of not being enough, scared that my being here is just a way of running from my own pain. You lost someone, Richard concluded, reading between the lines. Marina nodded slowly. A daughter, Laura, 7 years ago. She didn't need to give details. Richard understood. And in that moment, two strangers united by different pains found common ground. It wasn't romantic. It was mutual recognition. Two wounded people trying not to let their scars define other lives. The conversation stretched into the early morning. Richard told her about the orphanage, about growing up learning that emotions were dangerous, that love was conditional and temporary. Marina told him about Laura, about the helplessness of watching someone slip away without being able to do anything, about the years she spent just surviving until something woke her up again. When the sun began to rise, they were both exhausted but strangely renewed. Richard went up to his room, for the first time feeling that maybe he wasn't completely alone, and Marina lay down knowing that, despite all her fear, she was in the right place. The following days were different. Richard started coming out of his office more often. He didn't actively participate yet, but he was present. He had dinner with the children some nights. He asked how their day was. The kids, suspicious at first, slowly began to open up. It was a clumsy start, full of awkward silences and failed attempts, but it was a start. Lucas was the last to give in. His resistance was the deepest because his pain was the angriest. But Marina didn't give up, and one day when he deliberately knocked over a pitcher of juice for the 5th time that week, Marina knelt beside him, looked him in the eyes, and said with gentle firmness that she knew what he was doing, knew he was testing to see if she would also leave when she got tired of him, but that he could do it 1,000 times and she would still be there the next day. Lucas stared at her for a long minute. Then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, he began to cry. It wasn't the tantrum cry he usually used as a weapon. It was the cry of someone who finally allowed himself to feel. Marina hugged him as he sobbed, repeating between tears that he just wanted his mum back, that he just wanted everything to go back to the way it was. Marina held the 8-year-old boy as if he were the most precious treasure in the world, and whispered that she understood, that she also wished some things could go back to the way they were, but that sometimes life changes, and the only choice is to learn to live in the new world that emerges. Richard watched from the doorway, silent tears streaming down his face for the first time in decades. He saw in Lucas a reflection of himself as a child, alone, crying out for someone who would never return, and he saw in Marina the presence he had never had. Someone who didn't run from pain but held it firmly until it transformed into something else. When Lucas finally calmed down, he looked at Marina and asked in a small voice if she promised not to leave. Marina didn't make empty promises. She said she couldn't control the future, but her intention was to stay as long as they needed her. And for the first time, Lucas accepted that answer, because he finally understood that some promises can't be guaranteed. But that doesn't make the present any less real. That night, for the first time since Patricia had left, the 4 children slept in their own rooms. Not because they were forced to, but because they felt safe enough to be apart. Marina checked on each of them before turning in. Gabriel was reading a book, finally relaxed. Lucas was asleep, hugging a teddy bear he had hidden for months. Sophia had left her door ajar, a sign of trust, and Peter was snoring softly, finally at peace. Richard met Marina in the hallway. "Thank you." It was all he could manage to say. Marina smiled. "We're just getting started." And she was right. because the hardest part was yet to come. But for the first time, none of them would face it alone. The following weeks brought a subtle but profound transformation. The mansion in Westchester County began to feel less like a silent mausoleum and more like a home in the process of healing. The occasional laughter of the children echoed through the hallways. The smell of home-cooked meals replaced the sterile emptiness of a house no one truly inhabited. And for the first time in months, there was something resembling a routine. Marina established small rituals that the children gradually embraced. Breakfast together before school. Stories before bed. Sunday afternoons dedicated to simple activities like drawing, baking, or just sitting in the yard watching the clouds. Nothing grand, nothing forced. Just consistent presence turned into tradition. Gabriel, who had carried the weight of being the adult of the house for so long, finally began to relax. He was still the most serious of the four, but Marina noticed moments when he allowed himself to be just a kid, when he laughed at one of Lucas's silly jokes, when he asked for help with his homework without feeling like he was failing, when he let himself cry, when he was sad instead of swallowing it all to appear strong. Sophia blossomed quietly but steadily. The girl who used to hide behind furniture now sat next to Marina as she cooked, asking about ingredients, telling her about her dreams, drawing imaginary families on sheets of paper. There was a sweet vulnerability in Sophia that Marina fiercely protected, making sure that little flame wasn't extinguished again. Lucas still had his explosive moments, but now he could identify when the anger was coming. Marina had taught him to recognize the signs in his own body, the heat in his chest, the clenching of his hands, the quickening breath. And more importantly, she taught him that feeling angry wasn't wrong, but that he could choose what to do with it. Sometimes Lucas still broke things, but afterward, he would come and offer a real apology. And slowly, the intervals between the explosions grew longer. Peter, the youngest, was completely transformed. From a child in constant panic, he became curious and affectionate. He stuck to Marina like a shadow, but in a healthy way, seeking connection rather than desperate dependence. He started showing an interest in books, asking Marina to read to him every night, and memorized entire stories that he would later retell to his siblings with childish enthusiasm. Richard observed all these changes with conflicting feelings. There was gratitude for seeing his children finally find some peace, but there was also pain. Why did Marina succeed where he had failed? Why did the children open up to her in a way they never had with him? The answer, he knew deep down, was simple and devastating. Marina allowed herself to be vulnerable. She wasn't afraid to show that she was also imperfect, that she also felt pain, that she also made mistakes. And that created a safe space where the children could be human. Slowly, Richard began to learn from her, not through direct instruction, but through observation. He saw how she didn't try to solve every problem immediately, but let the children process their emotions first. He saw how she validated feelings instead of trying to fix them. He saw how she maintained firm but gentle boundaries, never punishing with anger, only with logical, explained consequences. And little by little he began to apply these lessons. When Gabriel got a bad grade on a test, Richard didn't explode about the importance of education. He sat next to his son and asked what had happened, really listening to the answer. When Lucas had a meltdown because he couldn't tie his own shoes, Richard didn't tell him to stop being a baby. He took a deep breath and showed him again, with a patience he didn't know he possessed. Marina and Richard also developed a quiet partnership. Brief conversations over the coffee she made in the early morning, before the children woke up. Shared glances when one of the kids did something particularly funny or touching, moments when he asked for advice. And she offered not ready-made answers but different perspectives. There was no romance in the traditional sense. There was something deeper, mutual respect, an understanding between two wounded people trying to create something healthy for four children who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. It was on a rainy afternoon in August that everything changed. Marina was organizing the closet in the room she used when she found a box she had brought with her, but never opened. Tucked away at the bottom of her suitcase, purposely forgotten because opening it meant facing something that still hurt too much. But that day, for some reason she couldn't explain, her hands trembled as she pulled the box out. Inside were a few objects: a worn-out pink children's ballet slipper, a few photos, a drawing made with colored pencils, and a grey teddy bear that smelled of must and memories. Laura, all that was left of her daughter. Marina held the teddy bear to her chest and felt her legs give way. She sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, and for the first time in months allowed herself to dive completely into the pain. It wasn't just silent tears. It was a convulsive sob, the kind that steals the air from your lungs and makes your whole body shake. 7 years. 7 years since Laura had gone, and she still didn't know how to live with that absence. Was she here trying to save other children just because she couldn't save her own? Was she deluding herself into thinking she could make a difference when she couldn't even with her own daughter? The questions attacked like knives, each one reopening old wounds she thought had scarred over. Sophia found Marina like that. The girl had gone upstairs to get a book she'd forgotten and heard the crying through the ajar door. Instead of calling her brothers or backing away in fear, Sophia entered slowly and sat next to Marina, saying nothing. She just sat there, her small hand finding Marina's, holding on with all the strength her 6 years allowed. Marina looked at the girl through her tears and saw in her eyes an understanding no child should have. Sophia knew this pain, this nameless sense of loss, and instead of trying to fix it, she just offered her presence, exactly as Marina had done, for her. "You miss your mum too, don't you?" Sophia asked in a small voice. Marina shook her head, swallowing a sob. "I miss my daughter." Sophia processed the information in silence. Then she asked with the brutal honesty of children, "Did she leave like my mom did?" "No, sweetie," Marina replied, her voice thick with emotion. "She didn't choose to leave. She got very sick and couldn't stay." Sophia nodded as if she understood perfectly, even if she didn't. "You must have been really sad." "I was," Marina confessed. "I still am." "Is that why you're here with us?" Sophia asked. "Because we get sad too?" Marina pulled the girl into a tight hug. "I think so. I think God or the universe or whatever is out there guided me to you because we all need healing, and sometimes we heal together." They stayed there for a long time, two people at different stages of life but united by the same wound. And when Gabriel, Lucas and Peter appeared at the door, worried about what was happening, they found Marina and Sophia hugging, crying together, but not alone. Peter ran to join the hug. Lucas hesitated but eventually came closer. And Gabriel, always the protector, sat beside them all and simply stayed there, offering his steady presence as an anchor. Richard, alerted by Mr. Henderson that something was wrong, hurried up the stairs and stopped at the bedroom door. What he saw paralyzed him. Marina, the strong woman who never showed weakness, crumpled on the floor, and his 4 children surrounding her, not scared or lost, but offering comfort in the way they had learned. They were taking care of her as she had taken care of them. Richard walked in slowly and knelt on the floor with everyone. "Marina?" he called gently. Marina lifted her tear-streaked face. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't. The children don't need to see this." Richard shook his head. "The children need to see that adults have feelings too. That being sad isn't weakness, that we all carry pain." It was Peter who broke the silence. "Marina lost her daughter," he announced with childish seriousness. "She's really sad." Richard looked at Marina and saw not just the competent caregiver, but the broken woman hiding behind the strength. "I'm so sorry," he said with deep sincerity. "I didn't know." "No one knew," Marina replied. "I didn't want anyone to know. I thought if I showed that I was broken too, you wouldn't trust me to take care of them." Richard carefully took her hand. "We're all broken here. That's exactly why we work." That night, after the children were asleep, Marina and Richard talked for hours. She told him about Laura, about the 5 short but intense years they had together, about watching her daughter slowly fade away, helpless to do anything, about the following years of just existing, not truly living, until something in that ad had awakened her, about the fear that she was using these children as a substitute for the daughter she had lost. Richard listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he shared his own story, about growing up without parents, learning that love was dangerous, building walls so high no one could reach him, about meeting Patricia, and believing he had finally found someone who would stay, only to discover that he himself had pushed her away with his inability to be present. About the terror of seeing his children repeat his patterns. "I think we're all just trying not to repeat the past," Marina said wearily. "But we're so scared that we end up creating new problems." Richard agreed. "How do we break this cycle?" Marina smiled sadly. "I think it starts with this. With sitting on the floor and admitting we're broken. With letting people see us for who we really are. With accepting that we don't have to have all the answers." They sat in a comfortable silence, two wounded adults realizing that maybe strength wasn't about not needing anyone, but about allowing yourself to need them. The following days brought a shift in the house's dynamic. Marina no longer tried to hide her humanity. When she was tired, she admitted it. When she made a mistake, she apologized. When she missed Laura, she allowed herself to cry without hiding. And the children, instead of being scared, seemed relieved. They finally had an adult who was real, not perfect. Richard also began to open up more. He told the children about his past, adapting the story for their understanding. He explained that he was also learning to be a father, that he made mistakes, but that he was trying. And for the first time, his children saw him not as a distant, powerful figure, but as a person. Someone who also had fears, who also needed help, who was also a work in progress. Gabriel started seeking out his father for conversations he once reserved only for Marina. Lucas challenged less and asked for guidance more. Sophia drew family portraits where everyone was together, including Marina. And Peter called Richard Dad, with a naturalness that hadn't existed before. The house was transforming, not into perfection, but into something real, messy and imperfect, but honest. For the first time, everyone could be vulnerable without fear of being abandoned for it. But the real transformation was yet to come, because a date was approaching that no one wanted to face. Patricia's birthday, the first one since she had left. And that date would bring to the surface everything that was still unresolved, all the wounds that were still bleeding beneath the surface of their apparent healing. Marina felt the tension building. The children became more irritable, more sensitive. Gabriel reverted to being overly controlling. Lucas had more outbursts. Sophia started hiding again. Peter started having nightmares again. And Richard, feeling helpless in the face of his children's renewed suffering, almost retreated back into his office. Marina knew the storm was coming. She knew that everything they had built would be tested in a way it hadn't been before, and for the first time since she had arrived at that house, she doubted if she would be strong enough to hold the pieces together when everything fell apart. But she had to be, not for herself but for 4 children who had finally started to believe they could be loved, for a man who had finally started to believe he could be more than his loneliness, and for Laura, her daughter, who wherever she was deserved to see that the pain of her departure was not in vain, that from that pain the ability to care for other children in need was born. The date drew closer, and Marina, Richard and the children prepared, each in their own way, to face the emotional storm that was coming. Together, for the first time, they would face the pain instead of running from it, and maybe, just maybe, on the other side of that storm, they would finally find the peace they were all searching for. The weeks leading up to Patricia's birthday were marked by a growing tension that hung over the house like a dark cloud about to burst. Marina felt the weight of the approaching date, saw the fear settling back into the children's eyes, and watched Richard subtly retreat into his old patterns of isolation. It was as if everyone knew a storm was coming, but no one knew exactly how to prepare for it. It was during this time that Marina discovered the truth about the anonymous tip. She woke up one night and went down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was steeped in the typical silence of 3 in the morning, when even the sounds of the big city seemed to fall asleep. But as she passed the hallway leading to the back of the property, she heard muffled voices coming from the pantry. One of them was unmistakable. Mr. Henderson. Marina wasn't in the habit of eavesdropping, but something in the urgency of the conversation made her stop. She leaned discreetly against the wall and listened. "I've already told you she's no good." Mr. Henderson's voice was low, but filled with conviction. "She showed up out of nowhere, no references, and suddenly she's running everything. Mr. Miller is blind." other voice, which Marina didn't recognize, mumbled something she couldn't make out. Then Mr. Henderson continued, "I did what I had to do. I reported her to social services because someone has to protect these children, and if I have to, I'll do it again. That woman will show her true colors, and when she does, I'll be here to say I told you so." Marina felt the floor drop out from under her. So it had been Mr. Henderson, the man who had worked for the family for over 15 years, who had known the children since they were babies, who had sworn loyalty to Richard. He saw her as an enemy. He genuinely believed he was protecting the family by trying to have her removed. The initial anger was replaced by something more complex. Marina understood that Mr. Henderson wasn't acting out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of change. Fear that an outsider could occupy a space he considered sacred. Fear of losing his own relevance in the family's life. She returned silently to her room and spent the rest of the night awake, deciding what to do with this information. Should she tell Richard? Confront Mr. Henderson? Or simply continue doing her job, proving through her actions that his suspicions were unfounded? The next morning, Marina made her decision. She waited for Mr. Henderson to finish his coffee and asked him to talk in the garden, away from the children's ears. "I know it was you," Marina said bluntly once they were alone. Mr. Henderson froze. For a moment, it looked like he would deny it, but then his shoulders slumped. "I did it for their own good," he said defensively. "Those children have suffered enough. They don't need another opportunist taking advantage of the situation." Marina took a deep breath, controlling the hurt that threatened to spill over. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your fear. I understand that from your perspective, I'm a stranger who invaded a space you've helped build for years. But answer me one thing. Do you think these children are better or worse off now than they were 3 months ago?" Mr. Henderson was silent. His hands trembled slightly. He knew the answer. He saw the children smiling again. He saw Gabriel relaxing his tense shoulders. He saw Lucas controlling his anger. He saw Sophia coming out from behind the furniture. He saw Peter sleeping through the night without nightmares. "You may not trust me," Marina continued in a softer voice, "and that's okay. Trust is built over time. But at least trust what your own eyes see. I'm not here to replace anyone or to take anything from anyone. I'm here because these children needed someone, and you better than anyone know that." Tears welled up in the older man's eyes. "I've worked for this family since before Gabriel was born," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw Mrs. Patricia walk into this house as a bride. I saw the boys born one by one, and I saw when it all started to fall apart. I saw Mr. Miller pulling away. I saw Mrs. Patricia withering from the inside until one day she just couldn't take it anymore, and I couldn't do anything, nothing, just watch it all collapse." Marina felt genuine compassion for the man before her. He wasn't a villain. He was just someone carrying his own guilt and fear. "Then help me," Marina said, extending her hand. "Help me take care of them. You've known these children their whole lives. You know things about them. I'll never know. We don't have to be enemies. We can be allies for their sake." Mr. Henderson looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he shook it. It wasn't instant friendship. It wasn't complete trust, but it was a start. In the following days, Mr. Henderson began to cooperate in a different way. He told stories about the children when they were little. He showed her old photos he had kept. He shared memories that helped Marina better understand each of them. And gradually, his resistance gave way to something resembling respect. But as that wound began to heal, another one opened. Richard received an unexpected call. It was Patricia. For the first time in 7 months, the woman who had abandoned her children in the middle of the night was on the other end of the line. Marina saw Richard turn pale after he hung up. He was sitting in his office, staring into space, clutching his phone with trembling hands. She knocked gently on the door and entered. "It was her," Richard said, without taking his eyes off the empty space. "Patricia," she called. Marina sat down silently, waiting for him to continue. "She wants to see the children." Richard ran a hand over his face. "She says she's better now, that she was sick but got treatment, that she misses them, that she wants to explain." "What did you say?" Marina asked calmly, though her own heart was racing. "That I needed to think, that I couldn't just let her come back as if nothing happened." Richard looked up for the first time. "What do I do, Marina? How do I explain this to them? Gabriel just started sleeping through the night again. Lucas finally stopped breaking things. How do I tell them their mother wants to come back?" Marina chose her words carefully. "I don't think you can decide this alone. The children have a voice. They deserve to know, and they deserve to choose whether or not they want to see her. And what if they do? What if she comes back and everything we've built falls apart?" There it was, the real fear. Not just Richard's, but Marina's too. The fear that everything they had built was temporary, that the real mother would return, and she, Marina, would be just a footnote in this family story. Richard noticed the subtle shift in her expression. "And you? How do you feel about this?" Marina was honest. Scared of losing them, scared of not being needed anymore, scared that Laura died and I attached myself to other children as a substitute, and now I'm going to lose them too. Richard took her hand. "This isn't a substitute. What you've done for them, for us, is real. It's real love. And real love isn't about possession. It's about wanting what's best for someone, even if it means stepping back." The words were beautiful, but they both knew the reality would be much more painful. That night, Richard gathered the children in the living room. Marina was present, but slightly apart, giving him space to lead the conversation. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Kids," Richard began, his voice wavering, "I need to tell you something. Your mother called." The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriel stiffened. Lucas clenched his fists. Sophia started rocking back and forth. Peter instinctively reached for Marina's hand. "What does she want?" Gabriel asked, his voice too harsh for a child. "She wants to see you. She says she was sick, but she's better now, that she misses you," Lucas exploded. She left us. Why would we want to see her?" "Because she's your mother," Richard answered gently. "And as much as it hurts, she always will be. But the decision is yours. No one is going to force anything." Sophia looked up, her eyes wet with tears. "If we see her, will Marina leave?" There it was. The fear Marina knew would come. She knelt in front of Sophia and held her small face in her hands. "No, sweetie. I promised I'm not going anywhere. Remember, your mom coming back doesn't change that. You can have two people who care about you. It doesn't have to be one or the other." "But what if we want Mommy back?" Peter asked in a tiny voice. "Will you be mad?" Marina felt tears burning her eyes but held them back. "Never. I will never be mad at you for loving your mother. She's your mother. She brought you into this world. She has every right to that space in your hearts." Gabriel, who had always been the most perceptive, saw beyond the words. "But you're scared of losing us." "I am," Marina admitted, "because I love you. And people who love are scared of losing. But my fear can't be the reason to stop you from having your mother back if that's what you want, and if it's healthy for you." The children digested this in silence. Then Lucas, always the most direct, asked what they were all thinking. "What if we don't want to see her? Does that make us bad kids?" Richard shook his head firmly. "Not at all. You have the right to protect yourselves, to not be ready, to feel whatever you feel. There's no wrong choice here." The conversation went on for hours. Each child expressed fears, anger, confused hopes. Gabriel admitted that part of him wanted his mother back, but he was afraid she would leave again. Lucas said he was too angry to want to see her. Sophia didn't know what she wanted. Peter just cried, too confused to process it all. In the end, they decided they needed time, that they weren't ready yet, that maybe one day they would be, but not now. And Richard, for the first time fully stepping into his role as protector, called Patricia and told her exactly that he would respect his children's time, that when or if they were ready he would let her know. But it wouldn't be now. The call was not well received. Patricia cried, begged, said she had rights as a mother, and Richard, with a firmness Marina had never seen in him, replied that she had given up those rights when she chose to leave without an explanation, that a mother's love wasn't just a feeling, it was constant presence, and that she would have to rebuild that from scratch, if and when the children allowed it. When he hung up the phone, Richard was shaking. Marina hugged him, and they stood there, two wounded adults trying to shield four children from more pain. "Did I do the right thing?" Richard asked against her shoulder. "You put your children first," Marina replied. "That's always the right thing." In the nights that followed, the children had nightmares. The possibility of a reunion with their mother, even if declined, had stirred up wounds that were just beginning to heal. Marina spent hours in their rooms, holding small hands, singing softly, reminding them they were safe. It was on one. To have those nights that Peter asked something that broke Marina's heart. "Marina, if Mommy comes back and we want to stay with her, will you stop loving us?" Marina held the 4-year-old boy against her chest. "Love doesn't end, sweetie. Real love never ends. If you ever go back to your mom, I'll miss you, I'll cry, but I'll keep loving you from a distance. Because love isn't about having someone close. It's about wanting that person to be happy, even if it's not with you. And what if we want to stay with you? Is that wrong?" "There's nothing wrong with feeling safe where you are. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of change." Marina kissed his forehead. "The heart is big, Peter. There's room for a lot of people. You can love your mommy and still want me to stay. One doesn't cancel out the other." Peter nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and finally fell asleep. Marina stayed there a while longer, watching his angelic face in the darkness, wondering what it would be like when the inevitable reunion finally happened. Because she knew it would happen. Patricia wouldn't give up easily. And the children, eventually, would need to face that part of their history. The question wasn't if, but when. And if, when that day came, there would be room for Marina, or if she would just be a distant memory of a time when they needed someone. Richard found her later that night, sitting alone in the garden under the moonlight. He sat beside her without saying anything for a long time. "I'm scared," Marina finally confessed. "For the first time, really, I'm scared of losing all of this." "Me too," Richard admitted. "But I think that's how we know it's real. We're only afraid of losing what truly matters." They sat there side by side, two imperfect adults who had found healing in each other and in the children they were trying to save. And for the first time, Marina allowed herself to acknowledge that it wasn't just the children who needed her. She needed them too, and that mutual dependence, far from being a weakness, was exactly what made this family real. The date of Patricia's birthday approached inexorably, and with it would come the storm that would test every bond they had built. But this time Marina knew she wouldn't face it alone. She had Richard. She had the children. She even had Mr. Henderson, who was slowly becoming an ally instead of an enemy. And maybe, just maybe, together they were strong enough to survive what was coming. The day dawned overcast in New York, the kind of grey morning that seems to foreshadow a storm, where the air is thick and every breath feels like an effort. Marina woke up early as always, but this time with a weight in her chest she couldn't ignore. It was August 23rd, Patricia's birthday. She knew the children were aware of the date. Gabriel had marked it on the calendar in red pen weeks ago, as if to brace himself for the inevitable pain. The last few nights had been difficult. Nightmares, crying in the night, arguments over insignificant things. Everyone felt the tension, but no one knew how to deal with it. Marina prepared breakfast in silence, pancakes again, trying to create some normalcy on a day that would be anything but normal. But when the children came down, no one touched the food. They sat at the table like automatons, their gazes empty, each lost in their own painful thoughts. Gabriel was the first to speak. "We should call her." "We don't know where she is," Lucas replied bitterly. "She forgot about us," Sophia whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Peter just cried silently, tears streaming down his face without him making a sound. Marina sat with them, not trying to fix anything. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, also at a loss for words. For the first time in months, this family was together, but each of them felt completely alone in their pain. The day dragged on heavily. The children didn't want to play, didn't want to watch anything, didn't want to do anything but exist in that space of grief for a loss that had no body to mourn. Marina respected it. She didn't try to distract them, didn't force cheerful activities. She just remained available, present, but not intrusive. Richard locked himself in his office again. Not out of indifference, but because he genuinely didn't know how to help. He himself was struggling with a mix of feelings: anger at Patricia for leaving the children, guilt for not being able to make her stay, a selfish relief that Marina was there, shame for feeling relieved, a whirlwind that left him paralyzed. It was late in the afternoon when everything fell apart. Gabriel went up to the room they shared and found an old photo of his mother that someone had left on the bed. They didn't know who. Maybe Mr. Henderson, in a well-intentioned but disastrous gesture. In the photo, Patricia was smiling, holding a baby Gabriel in her arms. A time when everything seemed perfect. A lie frozen in time. Something inside Gabriel broke. All the rigidity he had maintained for months, all the effort to be strong, to protect his siblings, to not fall apart. It all cracked at once. He grabbed the photo and threw it against the wall. The glass shattered. Lucas, hearing the noise, ran into the room. He saw his older brother finally breaking and felt his own anger explode. If Gabriel could fall apart, then so could he. He started knocking things over, books, toys, everything he could find. Sophia panicked. The two brothers who had always been her pillars of safety were collapsing. She started screaming, a sharp, desperate sound that cut through the air. Peter, terrified, ran through the hallways, crying loudly, disoriented. Marina ran upstairs. She found Gabriel destroying his own room with a fury he had never shown. Lucas punching pillows and screaming insults he barely understood. Sophia with her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. Peter hidden in the bathroom, curled up on the floor. Marina knew this moment would come, that the pain would eventually have to come out, and when it did, it would be devastating. But knowing that didn't prepare her for witnessing it. Her heart broke into 4 pieces, one for each collapsing child. "Gabriel," she called, trying to reach him through the storm. "Gabriel, look at me." But Gabriel couldn't hear her. He was too lost in his own pain. He picked up a vase Marina kept in their room, a memento from the grandmother who had raised her, an object with no monetary value but filled with history. And before she could stop him, Gabriel threw it on the floor. The vase shattered into dozens of pieces, and with it, something inside Marina shattered too. It wasn't anger. It was grief. It was the last physical piece of her grandmother, the woman who had taught her about love and care, now destroyed. Just like so, many other precious things life had taken from her. Lucas, seeing Marina's reaction, felt a twisted satisfaction born of pain. If she felt pain, then she was real. Then she could be hurt. Then she could leave like everyone else. And if she left first, maybe it would hurt less. He ran into Marina's room and started rummaging through her things, clothes thrown on the floor, books scattered. And then he found the box, Laura's box. Lucas opened it without knowing what it was. He saw the photos, the teddy bear, the ballet slipper, and in an impulse of self-directed destruction, he scattered everything. He tore photos. He threw the teddy bear out the window. He stomped on the ballet slipper. Marina entered the room in time to see the destruction. She saw her memories of Laura scattered, destroyed, desecrated, and something inside her simply gave way. It wasn't anger. It was resignation. It was the thought that maybe she wasn't strong enough for this, that maybe she should have stayed in her own pain instead of trying to save others. She could have screamed. She could have thrown the children out. She could have packed her bags and left, as everyone expected. But she did none of that. She simply sat on the floor amidst the wreckage of her most precious memories and cried. She cried for Laura. She cried for these 4 children. She cried for Richard. She cried for herself. Gabriel was the first to realize what they had done. He saw Marina on the floor, surrounded by the debris, and guilt hit him like a train. They had hurt the only person who had stayed, the only person who hadn't given up, and now she was going to leave. How could she not? He ran to Marina's room and stopped at the door, not daring to enter. Lucas was there too, frozen, finally understanding the gravity of what he had done. Sophia appeared behind them, with Peter clinging to her hand. "Marina," Gabriel called in a broken voice. "Marina, He couldn't form the words. He didn't know how to apologize for something so big. He didn't know how to fix what he had broken. Marina lifted her tear-streaked face. She looked at the 4 children in the doorway, all terrified, waiting for her to confirm their worst fear. That they were not worthy of love, that they were too destructive to be kept, that it would be better for everyone if she left. But Marina saw beyond the destruction. She saw 4 children so hurt that the only way they knew to express pain was by hurting others. She saw in them reflections of herself, in the years after losing Laura, when she had also destroyed relationships for fear of losing again. "Come here," Marina said, her voice soft but firm. The children hesitated. Was it a trap? Was she going to yell at them? "Come," Marina repeated, opening her arms. Peter was the first, running to throw himself into her arms. Then Sophia. Lucas took longer but eventually came closer, sitting beside her. Gabriel was the last, kneeling on the floor, unable to look her in the eyes. Marina wrapped them all up as best she could, holding the pile of broken children against her chest. "I know you're scared," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you wanted to hurt me to see if I would leave, because it's better to control when someone leaves than to be caught by surprise again." Gabriel sobbed. "We destroyed your things, from your daughter. You must hate us." Marina held his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I don't hate you. I'm sad, yes. I'm hurt, yes. But I'm not leaving." "You should," Lucas whimpered. "We're horrible. Mommy left because we're horrible." And there it was. The core wound. The fear that commanded all their destructive behaviors. The belief that they were the cause of their mother's departure. That they were intrinsically unlovable. "Listen to me very carefully," Marina said with all the firmness she could muster. "Your mother didn't leave because you're horrible. She left because she was dealing with something she couldn't solve. Adults have problems too. Adults break too. And sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love. But that is not your fault. You were children. You are children. And children do not have the power to make adults leave. Do you understand?" "But we hurt you," Sophia whispered. "And you're still here." Marina hugged the little girl tighter. "Because real love doesn't leave when things get hard. Real love holds the pain together. And I love you. All of you. Even when you hurt me. Even when you break my things. Even when you test how far you can go, I am not going anywhere." Peter lifted his wet face. "Promise?" Marina didn't hesitate this time. "I promise." And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't instant. It wasn't magic. But it was real. The children finally believed it. They finally understood that they could be loved even when they were imperfect, even when they were destructive, even when they carried giant pains in small bodies. They cried together for a long time. They cried for the mother who wasn't there. They cried for Laura, the girl Marina had lost. They cried for all the losses, all the fears, all the sleepless nights wondering if they were worthy of being kept. Richard found them all like that. He had come down when he heard the screaming and arrived in time to witness the end. He saw Marina holding his 4 children, all crying, but finally not alone in their pain. And he saw for the first time what it meant to be present. It wasn't about solving. It wasn't about fixing. It was simply about holding the pain together until it transformed into something else. He knelt on the floor and joined the hug. Marina looked at him, surprised, and saw tears in his eyes too. Richard, who never cried, who prided himself on his control, was there, vulnerable and real. The children squeezed tighter. For the first time since Patricia had left, they felt like a family. Imperfect, broken, but a family nonetheless. When they finally calmed down, it was already dark. Marina began to gather the pieces of her grandmother's vase and Laura's photos. The children helped her in silence, carrying their guilt, but also the understanding that they had been forgiven. "I'm sorry about your daughter," Gabriel said eventually. She was pretty in the pictures. Marina smiled through her tears. She was. And you'll get to know her one day in a way, because I carry her in my heart. And now you're all part of that heart. So, in a way, she knows you through me. The idea seemed to comfort the children in a strange way, as if Laura wasn't a threat or a competitor, but an additional connection to Marina. In the following days, the house reorganized itself, not in the superficial way it had before, but deeply. The children were no longer perfect. They still had bad moments, but now they knew that bad moments didn't mean abandonment. Richard changed too. He joined more meals. He talked to his children about feelings, not just grades and behavior. He admitted when he didn't know something. He asked for help. He became human. And then, 2 weeks later, on a quiet afternoon, the children held a secret meeting in their room. Marina and Richard heard whispers and nervous laughter, but didn't interfere. When they finally came down, they had a letter written in crooked letters with many spelling mistakes. Gabriel, being the oldest, was chosen to read. He cleared his throat nervously and began, "Marina, we know you're not our mum. And that's okay. We don't want you to be our mum. We want you to be Marina, which is better because Marina chose to stay. So we wanted to ask if you want to stay for real, not as a nanny but as family." Marina looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. She looked at the 4 children with hope in their eyes, and she said the only thing that made sense. "Yes, I do." The following months were about adjustment. Marina formalized her place in that house, not through marriage but through daily choice. Richard and she developed a partnership that went beyond the romantic. They were allies in raising 4 broken children who needed to see that love was more than a feeling. It was a decision. And then, almost a year after Marina had arrived, something unexpected happened. Marina discovered she was pregnant. The children received the news with mixed reactions: fear of being replaced, excitement about a little brother or sister, confusion about what it all meant. But Marina and Richard assured them time and again that a new baby didn't mean less love for them. It meant more love to go around. When the baby girl was born, the children were given the privilege of choosing her name. After much discussion, they decided Hope, because that's what she represented. The proof that after the pain, after the loss, after everything they had been through, it was possible to build something new and beautiful. The house in Westchester County, which once echoed with heavy silences, now vibrated with life. Fights happened. Difficult moments arose, but always there was the certainty that no one would leave when things got complicated. Gabriel grew up and became less rigid, allowing himself to fail without feeling like he would fall apart. Lucas learned to deal with his anger in healthy ways, channeling his energy into sports and music. Sophia blossomed, becoming a confident girl who no longer hid. Peter developed into a curious and affectionate child who was no longer afraid of being forgotten. Richard transformed into the father he always had the potential to be. Not perfect, but present. Not infallible, but honest. And Marina, carrying the memory of Laura but living fully in the present, became the center that held them all together. It wasn't a story of instant miracles. It was a story of daily choices, of getting up every morning and deciding to stay, even when it was hard, of holding the pain together until it transformed into healing, of building a family not by blood ties, but by the bonds of commitment. And in little Hope, who grew up surrounded by 4 adoring older siblings, by a mother who chose to be there, and by a father who learned to be vulnerable, lived the proof that new beginnings were possible, that the past did not define the future, that families were made not just by those who give us birth, but by those who choose to catch us when we're falling. The mansion was no longer silent. It was loud, chaotic, sometimes frustrating, but it was a home. And everyone who lived there knew, in the depths of their healed hearts, that they finally belonged somewhere, that they were finally enough, exactly as they were, that they could finally rest because they were not alone. And that, in the end, was all they had ever needed. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marina, Richard, Gabriel, Lucas, Sophia, Peter, and little Hope has deeply touched your heart. If you are moved by this journey of healing, abandonment, new beginnings, and true love, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment touched your soul the most. Every day we bring intense and real stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human heart, the pain that breaks us, and the love that rebuilds us. We'll see you in the next episode, with another story that will make you feel, reflect, and believe that new beginnings are always possible.